Okay, so I want to report now on the work that we've been doing over the past year on the MIRRA Plus project. I'm going to say a little bit about the context and research background. Then I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Pete Williams, who's going to talk about knowledge exchange workshops. And then we will move to Tanya Marchant from OLM, who will talk about the app development and testing. And she's also going to present the app to us, which is the most exciting bit as far as I'm concerned. And then Anna Sexton, my colleague, will talk a little bit about future considerations. So just to say a little bit about the context and research background. Child social care records are, as we've heard, a vital resource for memory making and identity for adults who were in care as children. The MIRRA project worked with care experienced adults in England to understand their experiences of accessing their care records, focusing on the needs of care experienced people to access their own files. MIRRA mapped the complex legislative, regulatory and practical challenges in the creation and management of children's social care records held by voluntary and public sectors in England, which need to be tackled to enable care experienced people to exercise their access rights to information about their own childhoods, and to ensure that public authorities understand their rights and obligations under data protection. The research was co-produced with a group of 11 care experienced adults and our community partner, the Care Leavers Association, the most active peer support network for care leavers in the UK, and drew upon qualitative data from over 80 further research participants. The first MIRRA project made some key findings. First, care experienced people of all ages often have a deficit of self-knowledge about their childhood, which impacts on their identity and sense of self. Many care leavers turn to their care files, that is, organisational records of out-of-home care, for answers. Accessing records has life-changing impacts for them, positive and negative. However, care leavers lack guidance about how to access their records and lack the emotional and practical support needed. Our second finding was that social care records often reinforce information inequalities. They lack personal memory objects and they rarely include life story work. Instead, records are designed to fulfil legislative and professional requirements of the care provider. None of our contributors felt that their voices or versions of events had been captured in their file. Thirdly, records management across public and private sectors is inconsistent, and in many cases, paper and digital records are incomplete, inaccurate, lost or destroyed. Information professionals have limited resources, sometimes have poor physical and intellectual control of records, and may lack adequate training. Next, the legislative and regulatory landscape for record keeping is fragmented, making it difficult for care leavers to exercise their information rights and for information and social care practitioners to understand their responsibilities. Critically, when information is redacted, that is, removed or blacked out from records, redaction was risk-averse, inconsistent, and rarely explained. Digital record systems, marketed for social care recording, constrain the changes which participants want to make. Systems place control of the record with social care and information governance professionals. They're not designed to facilitate access and participation by the care leaver. So the MIRRA research demonstrated the need for participatory record-keeping practices. For care experienced individuals, greater control of records relating to their out-of-home care can play an enduring therapeutic role in resolving issues of identity and self-image. The recent UK independent review of children's social care, The Case for Change, found that care experience carries stigma and can weaken identity, and that accessing care files can play a role in the lifelong memory and identity needs of care experienced people. For social care practitioners, the adoption of person-centred participatory recording helps to fulfil policy objectives for child-centred approaches. For example, the British Association of Social Workers' Top Tips Recording in Children's Social Work cited MIRRA's research to explain why it is important to capture children's voices in their records, and proposes practices that will improve child social workers' ability to record reflective, person-centred records efficiently. Information governance practitioners who reframe child social care record keeping as a caring activity rather than bureaucratic necessity would be better able to navigate key legislative requirements such as the Data Protection Act 2018 in socially just ways. MIRRA's work shaped the design and provided content for a new web resource, Family Connect, created in 2020 by Family Action, a charity that provides practical, emotional and financial support to disadvantaged families across the UK. Family Connect provides support and expert guidance for the 4,000 care leavers who seek access to their care files annually. Julia Feast, who will talk about this resource in a minute, or a few minutes, has described the website as a unique source of help and advice for the care experience community. And we were very pleased that Family Connect won the 2020 UCL Public Engagement Community Prize. MIRRA also produced a set of principles and a toolkit that outlines an approach to record keeping that focuses on the rights and needs of care experienced people at every stage. This framework establishes the benchmark for care-informed record-keeping practice, and it recommends that records should be co-created by all those involved in a child's care. They should be orientated towards the perspective of the child and young person, so their voice is centralised and included. Recording should be seen as a critical form of direct work, taking into account an individual's lifelong needs for memory, identity and information. Participatory approaches such as co-production and shared custody should be used to ensure that care experienced people's information rights are explicit, well understood by all involved and respected. 45 principles cover the steps needed in creating, managing and accessing records, including policies and resources, approaches to participatory recording and information sharing, physical and intellectual control of records for retention and preservation, advice on handling subject access requests, redaction, and the support needed by care experienced people. These all grow from the first principle, which is that care experienced people, children, young people, and adult care leavers of any age should be able to participate in every stage of child social care record keeping if they choose, including the creation of records while they're in care, the management of records during the period of retention, and the provision of access to records at any stage of life. We are hoping to publish the principles soon. However, they were used to underpin the second MIRRA project. So MIRRA Plus built on the findings of the first project. We worked in partnership with OLM Systems, a leading social care systems developer with 30 years experience in child social care. OLM perceived a synergy between the findings of our research and their ambition to develop a participatory record-keeping system, and said that MIRRA research has confirmed our experience that record-keeping for care leavers should be collaborative and participatory. In MIRRA Plus, we aim to develop a specification for a participatory digital record-keeping system, which can be developed for use in child social care settings in the UK. The project was inspired by the Open Notes model, a social justice movement founded on the basis of open source software that allows medical practitioners to share and collaborate on their notes with patients. The ambition of the MIRRA Plus project is to create a specification to act as proof of concept for the development of software that will serve the needs of the child social care community. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleagues who will talk about how we went about the work through knowledge exchange workshops, developing the problem statement, writing software specifications and user testing and feedback, and then towards the end some future considerations. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Pete Williams.
Hi, thank you, Elizabeth. Before we move on to the presentation, I'd just like to take about 30 seconds to say that it's so good to see on the attendee list so many people that have helped us along this journey, really. Not only since I started on the project a year ago, but also from MIRRA One. Lots and lots of people that I've had many email exchanges with and virtual meetings. I hardly met anybody face to face, but I'm so used to seeing people in a little square now. So thank you so much to everybody who supported us and is here today. So thank you. So just before we move on, knowledge exchange workshop, the first part of Elizabeth's list of activities that went towards this participatory record keeping specification. Just a message from Elizabeth, which I will answer actually. Yes, I am recording, so don't worry. So next slide, please. Say my best witty manner. So first of all, what and why? And I can hear my daughters when they were teenagers saying, what's the point of that? What's the point when MIRRA One obtained incredibly rich data from the participants during the course of many lengthy and really interesting interviews with our care experience co-researcher group, established problems and people's stories and triumphs and so on and so forth. So what is the point of having this knowledge exchange to part two? Well, actually, there were several reasons for it. First of all, I personally wasn't involved in MIRRA One. So for me, it was really interesting and important to get to know people to, as far as possible in this environment, to hear firsthand rather than just read their stories and the publications that came out of MIRRA One. And similarly for our colleagues and friends at OLM who were only joining in part two, very important for us to understand the landscape, if you like, the sort of social landscape of what we were in. That kind of covers the context as well, actually. So it was so important to really establish the situation. And finally, unlike MIRRA One, this particular exercise went towards the production of this participatory app specification that Elizabeth mentioned, which is the whole aim of the project in this particular part. So the knowledge exchange went towards establishing the stakeholders, if you like, requirements for this particular system. So in all of those respects, it was a really valuable exercise. And I think, I'm hoping that the participants enjoyed it as much as I did. It was really fascinating to hear people's stories and their priorities of what they wanted from this piece of software. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so having said that, in the first MIRRA established lots and lots of information, or discovered lots of information about people, and as Elizabeth said, created 45 participatory record keeping principles. So how did we manage to avoid repeating MIRRA One? So actually what we did was use those principles, and as I said here, don't worry, I won't read them all out. We used the principles as a basis for a discussion around the app development. Now, in the first MIRRA, there were 45, as I mentioned. What we did before we had this knowledge exchange, or these knowledge exchange sessions, was to choose the most appropriate 20 that addressed specifically issues around participation and the system itself. So I'll just read out one as an example that we didn't use. So we didn't use this particular principle. Records should avoid jargon, unexplained acronyms, etc. Okay, So if you're considering only the system itself cannot really legislate for the information that people put in, unless you have crazy sort of stop words or something. So we didn't count that issue, although as an aside to that, of course, by making it participatory, by default, you kind of reduce the possibility of too much jargon, because the participants, the people in care, help to create the record. But in simple terms of the app development, that kind of thing, talking about language, isn't so central. But we did include this particular principle: records should be indexed, organized and stored in ways that enable quick discovery. Now that addresses absolutely centrally the app, and Tanya later will go through some screenshots that that address those principles. So what we did was we gave these 20 principles that we established from the 45, and to the people who we managed to recruit for the knowledge exchange sessions, we asked them to choose their 3 or 4 priorities before we actually had the meeting. So that was a very tough exercise, I think, because obviously they're all very important. So it was a very difficult job for them to choose their 3 or 4 and to come to the meeting to discuss. Okay, anyway, I'm jumping ahead. So if we could move to the next one, Elizabeth, please. Okay, so here we are. So this is the actual process. As you can see, I've made it as complicated as possible to impress everybody. But basically, there were 2 workshops. The first one, it's very small on my screen, so sorry if you can't read those the words in the little boxes, but I'll talk through it. So there were 2 workshops. The first one was with what we termed requesters. So these were the care experience people who may or may not, but certainly had the right to request. Hang on. A little message for me. Certainly had the right to request information about themselves, to request their care records. The other group were what we termed deliverers. Those were people who provided the information, so social workers and information professionals. So we had these 2 groups and 2 separate workshops. I think we had 5 requesters and 8 deliverers, if I'm not mistaken, and they came with their 3 or 4 priority principles, and we had what we call a dot vote. I'll show you a diagram of that later, but basically they just voted for the 3 or 4, and we looked at which ones were the most popular between each group. Okay, and that was undertaken at the start of the meeting, and we had this very, very interesting discussion with both groups around reasons for choosing those particular principles, why other principles weren't chosen, bracket, which were also important, of course, and also, which was fascinating, the thought processes that went into it and how people actually felt making these choices, which were clearly based on principally their own experiences, either in care or delivering records to people. So it's a really fascinating exercise. And in the end, we were able to get an overview of the stakeholder priorities to take forward in the app development. Okay, so I'll just, if we move to the next slide. So the next slide, very, very quickly, because I don't really want to repeat what has been said already, but these are the findings for the discussion element. 3 issues were very central: redaction, access, and content. Okay. So first of all, redaction was mentioned very much by both groups. So for the care experience people, this practice of redacting or deleting, obscuring information from them was, very, very frustrating. It made it much more difficult to build up a picture of their own time in care and reasons for different events and to establish memories and so on. One person actually said that in their care record, there was a party invitation from somebody, and the name of that person who'd invited them to a party was itself blacked out. So, you know, it's kind of like a Secret Service press briefing where you get like one line in every 5 and the rest is a big black block. So obviously that created a lot of frustration and anxiety on the part of people requesting their records. And also the people who were the providers similarly had problems with this because they felt that in their profession there wasn't enough training given, people didn't really understand the flexibility of the law, and they really felt that they tried their hardest to redact as minimum possible within policies and legislation and so on and so forth. Just a little quick warning, I've had a message on my computer to say your internet connection is unstable. So if I vanish, I'm honestly not running away. I'll see if I can continue to the end. So the next one was access. So this, again, people had the right of access, but there were so many hoops to jump through to gain access. And we've heard the powerful testament of Jackie in particular about accessing her records. So that was a big issue. And finally, content. Well, this, you know, content is king, as they say. And in this, people who had accessed their records were absolutely dismayed by the redactions, but also by the fact that their own voices were nearly absent. And there's one famous quote from one of our care experience co-researchers, John George, who's actually in this room with us at the moment, when he read his record, which he said wasn't actually very redacted, but nevertheless, his own voice didn't appear until something like page 52 of his file. There was nothing regarding his own point of view or his words or anything about that's centrally his. So incredible, really. All right, next slide, please. All right, so I don't expect you to be able to read these, but nevertheless, I hope that this is a useful visual representation of the dot voting, and hopefully also it's kind of self-explanatory. So the little kind of post-it notes, the virtual post-it notes, they represent the principles that we were looking at, the 20 from the 45, and obviously the dots represent people's votes, their priorities. And because you can't see it, I've got a little note myself. So the dots are clustered around inclusion of sentimental items. Okay, so that relates to the content. Redaction, of course. Participatory record keeping, which is obviously central. And the final one was creative record keeping. Now, all of those point to the greater participation of people in their own records. And I will hand over now to Tanya to take forward the next stage of this process after the knowledge exchange. I just want to address one very quick thing. Somebody's asked about the slides. We will ask all the speakers if it is possible to provide the slides. But so thanks for that comment, and thank you very much. Over to you, Tanya.
Thank you, Pete. I'm just going to share my screen. Start. Oops. Okay, so just a little bit around what Pete had mentioned. The dot voting, it might feel a bit like we were making people make very tough choices. We work in an agile development and we're producing a prototype, so we had to have some level of focus. So although all of the 20 findings that we asked people to vote on are very important to us and are there for future consideration, we have to start somewhere. So hence the need to make people make that decision, and better that the experts make that decision than we as programmers and developers make that decision. So it was very important for us to include them in that process, and to hear why they made those decisions, give us the context of that understanding. So it was a great exercise, and one that we learned a lot from. So taking that forward, what we then needed to do was what we call define our problem statement. This is something that helps us identify our goals of the project. It outlines the scope of the project. It helps us guide the activities and the decisions we make when we work on a prototype. It is, by definition, the description of the problem to be solved. So we go about this by defining who is affected, so who's having the problem, who will benefit from our solution, what do we know, what have we assumed about them. We then define what it is about the problem, what is it about, what is the problem, how easy is it to explain, is it a real problem, what evidence do we have of this problem, and then we go on to the where and when does it occur. So this gives us the concept of the person is experiencing the problem. It helps us explain when the problem is occurring, and we delve down into quite details later on around proving the problem when the problem is happening in certain contexts or a certain space. All this information will help us decide what kind of solution to build. And finally, probably the most valuable piece of the problem, and actually one that's the easiest for us to actually define, is why is this important? What's the important value to the user? What are the pain points that this solution will help get rid of? Why is the problem important? Now, we do this again in a collaborative way. We worked with our colleagues at UCL. So my colleagues within my UX team and the colleagues from UCL came together, again, virtually, the power of Zoom. We all know the reasons why that will be. But we did come together and we did work through a workshop where we defined our problem statement. We defined the who as looked after children between the ages of 13 and 18. Now, we take a slice of children, a slice of an age group, because as you can imagine, children's needs change quite dramatically in certain areas and certain jumps of their life. So not one size fits all for all children. So we took this particular, we felt this was the age group that we wanted to focus on. We then described what the problem was, and the problem was very clear that these children didn't have the tools, maybe they didn't have the experience or the opportunity to express themselves, and we've heard that a lot today about not having the voice, not hearing their voice until page 52. Where and when, what we're trying to solve. So it's about them having the opportunity to explain how they feel, what's happening to them, what's important to them, their voice in that moment in time. And the why. Well, it's important to give these children in looked after situation the autonomy and the control over their own life story, enable them to talk for themselves, and enable them to have that as evidence and a part of their record when they come to listen and try to figure out their story later on in life. Next steps were that we, as the commercial element of this project, a partner of this project, we worked internally. So my UX team, a dedicated designer, and another UX colleague, Laura, we worked together and we worked on personas. So this is important because it gives us an idea of who we're developing for. And our persona was of a young lad called Sam, age 14, who'd been in long-term care. We mapped out as best we could, knowing on all the evidence that we'd read and from MIRRA and from the stories that we'd heard. We detailed his emotions, his wants, his needs, his pains, his frustrations. All of these help us when we come to build an application. We mapped out his average day. This helped us figure out what digital touch points he might have. We knew this was going to be a digital solution. We were building a technology prototype. So when could this happen for him? And was this a good idea? And at what points in his journey do we think that this would be something he'd want to engage with? Then we moved on to the proper brainstorming and the product ideas. And again, don't forget, we brought those ideas aligned with our problem statement. So we're always thinking about that problem statement. We're looking at features, we're looking at competitors, about what they're doing with their products, etc. And we designed and built a prototype. So the product ideas are aligned with the overall problem. They really do, as far as we've made our best efforts and we've done our user testing against, really concentrate on autonomy, on control, so the Sam's control of his experience, and creating his own voice that can go into his care record. And this is the prototype. I'm going to show you a little bit more than that on the prototype, so let me just stop sharing for a second while I change screens. Okay, so I'm going to walk through the app now. I'm going to show you as Sam, as you can see here. So this is designed for a mobile, can be used on a tablet. It also can be used on a desktop. It's a responsive app and will change and best and optimize to whatever screen's being used to access it. The app, once you've signed on, every day will pop up with this message. And this is just a way that we get Sam to really make a point of how he's feeling. You know, we wanted to make sure that we helped Sam when he's using this app, because he might not have the experience or know the words or know what to write. And a blank piece of paper for anybody is daunting. So it really does try to trigger and help Sam complete entries into his journal. So on this particular day, Sam is going to say that he is happy and he is calm. So he can click as many of these emotions as he likes. It's not restricted in any way. He can write a little bit about how he feels. He can also skip. If today isn't a day that he wants to record this, he can skip. It will just appear on the first time of the day that he accesses. So if he accesses late this afternoon, he might not necessarily be asked this question if he's answered it. So anyway, if Sam's going to post this, that he's happy and he's calm. And you can see straight away that actually populates an entry into his journal. So it's automatically there and populated for him. Now, one of the important things that we picked up was that people would want to be able to quickly and easily discover old posts and search, and to have that in a way that was easy and for you to find. So Sam's now he's thinking about he put an entry in about his family, about his friends on the 14th of March. Now he can do this in various ways because we don't like to restrict users to just one way. Everyone's different. He can scroll as we're normally used to, and it's all in date order. He can use the calendar. You click on the calendar, you can see there's the 14th of March. And if I click on the 14th of March, you'll see the post is there for him to read, and he can click on that and read a little bit more about that if he wanted to. He can also search. So the post was about friends, so he can click on the search and search with the keywords, or he can click on the tags. And I'll explain a little bit more about these tags as we go forward. And he can click on the friends tag. And as you can see, it has pulled 2 posts back there, but the 14th of March is there for him to read. Now, at any point while using the app, the add button is always prominent. And this is because then it should be easy for Sam to actually add a new post. So Sam's going to go ahead and add a new post. We really took time when considering this, again, that blank piece of paper being daunting and what to write. We wanted several different ways in which to help Sam engage with the app. So the first section of this actually gives Sam the opportunity to choose what style he would like to write in, whether he would like to do an audio voice note, something that I'm now doing on my mobile, but youngsters are a little bit more accustomed to doing, do drawing, upload a picture. And then we thought about how the problem statement really did focus on the not having the experience of being able to know what to write. And we've got this idea of these smart suggestions, and these would grow over time. They'd be based on AI performance of how Sam used the app. But for today's demo, I'm going to click on 3 good things. And they're suggested they're templates for him to complete. So as I click on it and I click next, I'll then get a little bit of information about what I should write, a real helper, hint of how I can write something. Now, at this point, Sam can change his mind. He can read that and think, actually, I don't want to write that. And he can change. He can add a picture. He can turn it into a list. He can change the prompts into something else if he wants to. He can also customize this particular post, and customization and that autonomy and owning the app was very important. So at this point, he can click on a customization and give the post a colored background if he likes. And previously we talked about the tagging, and that's an element of defining what this post is about and allowing Sam to, in the future, go back and look at all the posts that were around holidays or all the posts that are around sport. The app, by default, will have some set tags, but Sam, again, so he can really own his experience, can actually add in his own tags as and when he wants to. And finally, the autonomy and ownership was really important, that Sam feels that this is a safe space, that it's his space where he can contribute. So by default, every post that Sam makes in the journal is private to him. But if he wants to share it with his social worker, he has the opportunity to share that post. So he can click on there and that will share his post in that way. We talked a little bit about the customization and how it's important that Sam has control. When he goes to his profile picture, Sam can choose whichever picture he likes. Here you can see that he says his picture, his name, and some stars. And that is something when Sam behaves in a certain way on the app, he'll get recognition and he'll earn points. Those points, that recognition and that point reward system is a way that we can then help Sam become more confident and use the app and be rewarded for using the app. We want them to use the app. We want them to create their feelings in their journals, and we want to reward them for doing that positive behavior. By gaining those points, like I say, this is a prototype, but the future for consideration is how we turn those points into something that can be tangible within the app. So maybe more customization options. So if we look at what's currently available in the app, Sam can change his name, he can upload an avatar, he can change the app's colors. Very basic, but gives a lot of ownership. And also one of the things that we thought we'd really like to add is the fact that Sam can change those mood icons. So on that first entering into the app, he can choose different icons to represent his feelings and have different ways to articulate how he feels with different emotional IDs. And as he gains more and more points, he'll gain more and more opportunity to customize this area and to upload different kinds and to unlock different features of customizing the app. So that's the prototype. So I'll just stop sharing, go back to my presentation. Sorry, apologies for that. So once we built the prototype, we did take that to some usability testing. And for those that aren't used to that term, it's where we take the application, we put it in front of people that fit the profile of the user that's going to use the application, and we ask them to perform certain tasks. So in this instance, we ask the participant to add a post, we ask them to find a post, we ask them to change their display name. And so we were lucky enough, and Pete worked incredibly hard as did the rest of his UCL colleagues, to get ethical approval to approach 13 to 18-year-olds that were in were in a looked after situation. Pete then worked incredibly hard again to recruit and find people. It was very difficult for us to find people, and we do think that part of consideration is to try and find more individuals that this can be tested against, so we can validate the app in more ways. And as the app is developed by whoever develops it, we would hope that they would continue that engagement with the participants. Generally, the insights were that it was a great app and it was good feedback. We want this app to be easy to use. We don't want to deliver a training manual with it. It needs to be intuitive. It needs to fit the need of the person using it. In fact, the individual that did help us with the testing had very positive feedback for the way that the app worked. Felt that the fact that you could change your display name, you could change what you were called at a particular time, that ownership of defining themselves was very important. But the fact that we didn't ask what gender they were was very important. This current generation growing up, being identified by gender is at the top of their minds. And so the participant did feel that by us not asking their gender, we had removed a barrier for download. She felt that if the app actually asked the gender, that would put a lot of young people off actually using the app. And very much enjoyed the way that the app had no social work terms. It didn't feel like homework. It felt more nurturing, and that's an area of further development that we want to unpick, and Anna will talk about that in a moment. We also included the co-researchers, and we gave demonstrations to those people, and we listened to their feedback, and all the feedback for the app is documented in the final report, which I'm not going to go into great details today. I don't have the time, unfortunately. But like I say, it's all included in the app. So that's the end of my presentation. So I will hand back to Elizabeth.
Thank you, Tanya, so much. It's really exciting to see the product of all that work. So it was absolute pleasure, I have to say.
I mean, it's been an emotional 2 days listening to the stories, as it was when we did the knowledge exchange, but it's an absolute pleasure that OLM has been able to work with you on this, and I look forward to the future developments of the app.
Yeah, well, we were delighted to be able to work with you. It's been so interesting and fruitful and productive over the past year, so thank you ever so much. So now for the final bit of this session, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Anna Sexton for some thoughts about the future, where we should go in future.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Anna.
Yeah, you're resharing. Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to talk through the kinds of considerations that need to be taken into account before we move the prototype that we've developed with OLM into any kind of fully functioning app, which could be integrated into a participatory record keeping system. And conscious of time, I'm going to whiz through these a little bit quicker than I did yesterday, so we all get a bit of a break before the next session.
Yeah, don't worry too much, Anna, because we can adjust it. We'll start the next session a few minutes late. That's not a problem. Yeah.
Okay, so the considerations that I want to talk around, if you could share the next slide, Elizabeth, can be framed broadly around 3 issues, which are content, data sharing and storage. And I'm going to put these in turn and offer just a few thoughts. So in relation to content, the nature and creation of content is obviously of huge importance for adopters of the app, especially if it's going to be used, as we envisage, as forming part of the child's care record. So there are several issues regarding the uploading of personal photos or other more personal content. And these include the safety of the care experienced individual in sharing photos and personal content about themselves, and also the safety and privacy of third parties who are represented in the content, both in relation to compliance with legislation like GDPR, but also in terms of a general sensitivity to the possible impacts on other people. So questions that we have that have been circulating around the research that we've done are things like, what guidelines need to be drawn up to ensure that content shared is appropriate? And what, if any, gatekeepers need to come into play? So one potential gatekeeping measure would be content moderation. But if content was moderated, does that compromise the idea of autonomous youth-led contributions, or is a degree of moderation necessary for safeguarding? And is there a case to be made for facilitators who may be the carer or social worker taking a role in practicing a form of facilitated autonomy where they support the young person in using the application? And that sort of moves us on to a discussion of third-party contribution. The extent to which, if at all, the young person and their carer or support worker could co-create an entry. And that would be a matter for each party to consider carefully. So there may be young people who would zealously guard against any additional content from others, and some who may not even wish any of their entries to form part of their record. Others may not only enjoy co-creation, but permit others to upload content and show it to the young person for approval and retention. Such content might be something as simple as a photo, a school event, or a party invitation. But you can also imagine kind of the uploading of contrasting accounts, both from the young person and a carer, in relation to a particular event. So now moving on to issues of data sharing and the issue of data control. The app is designed for the young person to have both input and some control over the content of their record. And that aspect raises the issue of data ownership and access rights. The app specification allows the young person to either share individual posts with their caseworker or their social worker, or to keep them private. Logically, only shared posts would become part of the formal care record, but the extent to which this would be automatic or also subject to the choice of the young person may be an issue for negotiation or policy. In relation to record storage, the participatory record-keeping principles that have come out of the first stage of MIRRA make a number of recommendations around managing records, including around records retention, suggesting that the retention of records should reflect their potential lifelong value over and above the minimum legal retention period. So our participatory principles say that records of looked after children should be retained for at least 100 years from birth, in line with the retention of adoption files. We also extend this to records relating to children in need and any records that involve social care intervention analogous to being looked after. And also we say in our participatory record-keeping principles that photographs and personal documents which may relate to a care experienced person should be kept for at least 100 years, even when they are not associated with a case record. So to implement those recommendations requires a really robust digital preservation plan to underpin the rollout of the app. And I think there are lots of record keeping issues that sit underneath that, and that record keepers, records managers, archivists have a really important role in playing in helping us shape and understand. Consideration would also need to be given around retention to what happens if the child themselves, on reflection, a few weeks, months or years later, decide that they wish to delete some of their own contribution. One possibility to address this issue might be to operate a system whereby a post the young person wishes to add to their record is designated as provisional for a certain time period, at the end of which the person would decide whether to retain it as part of the record. But dealing with issues that tie into the right of amendment and the right to be forgotten are really important. So data subjects have the right to have personal data erased in the UK, and that's known as the right to erasure. And that's one of the provisions of the UK General Data Protection Regulation. And if the request relates to data collected from children, as would be the case in the app, there is a greater emphasis on this right, reflecting the enhanced protection of children's information, especially in online environments. So the process of deletion and how that ties into retention is an area for really careful consideration before implementation. So these issues around content, data sharing, storage, retention,